The world knew him as the King, a name that was not a title but a fact. He was a seismic force of nature who had ripped the hinges off popular culture. A man whose gyrating hips and snarling lip had fundamentally rewired the 20th century. But on the suffocatingly humid afternoon of August 16, 1977, that king was found cold, alone, and undignified, face down on the deep pile carpet of his Graceland bathroom. Within hours, the world's media, a frantic swarm of locusts, descended on Memphis. A hastily assembled press conference was called, and the medical examiner, Dr. Jerry Francisco, delivered the official verdict to a planet holding its breath: cardiac arrhythmia. It was a clean, simple, and tragically respectable term. A heart failure. It was the word of a medical professional, and for a public instantly draped in grief, it was enough. It was a story they could understand. The king's heart, so full of love and music, had simply given out. But behind the iron gates of Graceland, a far more complex and sordid story was already being frantically suppressed. The official story was a lie. A necessary, kind lie perhaps, but a lie nonetheless. The truth was not in the tragic failing of a single organ. It was in the blood. It was in the toxicology report that, despite all efforts to contain it, would soon be leaked, painting a devastating chemical portrait. This report revealed a pharmaceutical avalanche, a toxic cocktail of 14 distinct, powerful, and competing prescription drugs, 10 of them in significant toxic quantities. This was not a natural death. It was a chemical siege, a slow-motion overdose orchestrated over years. And the architect of this siege was not some shadowy back-alley dealer. He was one of the king's most trusted confidants, a man who was supposed to be his savior, the man who held his medical trust in his hands, Dr. George Nicopolis, known to the world and to Elvis simply as Dr. Nick. This is the story of how a doctor's sacred oath, blurred by the blinding light of fame and the seductive pull of proximity to power, dissolved into a catastrophic betrayal. It is the story of how 10,000 prescriptions in a single year became the funereal soundtrack to a king's final tragic decline, and how the search for relief became a death sentence. It did not begin as a betrayal. It rarely does. It began, as it so often does in these insular worlds of fame, with a desire to help and an equal desire to be included. Dr. Nick first entered Elvis Presley's orbit in 1967. This was not the bloated, jumpsuit-clad figure of the final years. This was Elvis in his prime, still handsome, still dangerous. Dr. Nick was called to the Presley residence on a simple matter: to treat minor ailments, saddle sores from horseback riding at the Graceland Ranch. He was not a typical Hollywood doctor, the kind Elvis had grown wary of, men who saw him as a walking bank account. Dr. Nick was a Memphis local, a Greek-American physician with a respected family practice. And by his own admission, he was a fan. He was at first starstruck. He saw not just a patient, but an icon. Elvis, in turn, saw something he craved: a professional who was not intimidated. Elvis was even then a notorious hypochondriac, a man obsessed with his health yet simultaneously terrified of illness, a walking contradiction of vulnerability and power. He was isolated by his own fame, trapped in an echo chamber of his own creation, and he craved genuine connection and, above all, relief. Dr. Nick listened. This, perhaps, was his most potent skill. He didn't just prescribe. He listened. He listened to Elvis's fears of insomnia, a crippling affliction that had haunted him since his early touring days. He listened to the complaints of stage anxiety, the chronic pains from his demanding physical performances, and a host of other ailments, some real, some imagined. And most importantly, Dr. Nick provided the pills for sleep. He provided the energy shots for stamina. He was attentive, he was available, and he was discreet. He became a fixture. He was the man who could be called at 3 a.m, the man who understood the impossible, crushing pressures of being Elvis Presley. He was soon absorbed, as all useful people were, into the Memphis Mafia, the tight-knit inner circle of bodyguards, friends, and employees. He was given his own car. He was given perks. He was invited to the parties. He was no longer just a doctor. He was the doctor. He was the gatekeeper to the king's health and, by extension, the king's ability to function. This bond was forged not in the sterile objectivity of a clinic, but in the intoxicating intimacy of Graceland's inner sanctum. It was a bond of loyalty, a dangerous precursor to the codependency that would come to define and destroy them both. Dr. Nick had crossed a line, perhaps without even realizing it, from physician to confidant, from healer to enabler. He was no longer just managing a patient's health. He was managing a star's career, and the pharmacy was his primary tool. The true turning point, the moment this symbiotic relationship shifted from routine treatment to critical maintenance, was the 1968 comeback special. It was a triumph, a raw, leather-clad resurrection that stunned the world. It was Elvis, defiant and electric, proving to a new generation that he was and always would be the king. But that triumph, that peak, set an impossible standard. And his domineering, carnival barker manager, Colonel Tom Parker, saw the path forward not as a creative renaissance, but as a lucrative trap. Las Vegas. The deal he struck with the International Hotel was a set of golden handcuffs, a contract that would lock Elvis into a relentless, grueling schedule. This wasn't a rock and roll tour. This was a residency, often 2 shows a night, 7 days a week for months on end. It was an entertainer's marathon, a physical and mental grind that no human being could sustain naturally. The physical toll was immediate and catastrophic. The adrenaline of the performance was a mountain, but the crash afterward was a lightless canyon. Elvis could not sleep. His body was ravaged, his voice strained. He could not wind down. And in the morning, he could not find the energy, the will, or the chemical spark to do it all over again. This is where Dr. Nick's role fundamentally and fatally changed. He was no longer treating a patient. He was servicing an asset. He was the chief engineer of the Elvis Presley machine. To get the king up for a show, there was a cocktail. To get him down after the show, there was another. The infamous vitamin shots that the bodyguards would recall were, in fact, potent and often undisclosed. Cocktails of amphetamines, steroids, and stimulants, designed to jolt Elvis into performance mode, to mask the pain, to ignite the charisma. Then, to counteract that blast of artificial energy, came the chemical counterbalance. The sedatives, the heavy-duty painkillers like Demerol, and the powerful sleeping pills, the Quaaludes, the Placidil. Dr. Nick developed what he would later term a protocol, a word that lent a false air of medical legitimacy to what was, in reality, a system of managed addiction. He meticulously organized the pills into small envelopes, the infamous attack packets. These packets were a logistical marvel of pharmaceutical control. There was a packet for waking up, a packet for pre-show, a packet for post-show, and the most potent, dangerous packet of all, the one for sleep, a knockout blow designed to fell a man who was already saturated with stimulants. This wasn't medicine. This was chemical choreography. The audiences in Vegas, who had traveled the world and paid top dollar to be there, saw the glittering, sequined jumpsuits. They saw the karate kicks, the sweat-drenched scarves, and they heard the voice that defined a century. They had no idea that the man inside the suit was being chemically puppeteered, held upright by a pharmacological scaffold built and maintained, day in and day out, by his personal physician. The line between a doctor's oath and a loyal subject's duty had not just been blurred. It had been utterly irrevocably erased, and as Elvis's tolerance for the drugs grew to superhuman levels, Dr. Nick found himself in a constant, escalating pharmaceutical arms race. The doses had to be stronger, the combinations more complex. He was trapped in a cycle he had created. He was on call 24/7, his entire life revolving around the king's chemical needs. He was no longer a doctor. He was a prisoner of his own most famous patient. He was in too deep. The money was too good, the proximity to fame too intoxicating. He was trapped just as Elvis was in the golden cage of the International Hotel. And the only thing more powerful than his medical bag was the king's unceasing, desperate, and childlike demand for more. This escalating dependency, this conspiracy of silence, did not go unnoticed. It was a secret kept poorly by a large group of people who owed their livelihoods to the king. The Memphis Mafia, the bodyguards, the staff, the inner circle, they all saw the decline. They saw the frightening weight gain, the lethargy, the slurred speech, the terrifying, unpredictable mood swings. They saw the man who would nod off mid-sentence, the man who would fall off the stage, the man who would lock himself in his room for days. But the most desperate and most powerless witness was Elvis's wife, Priscilla. She watched in abject horror as the man she had loved since she was a teenager disappeared. dissolving before her very eyes, replaced by a paranoid, emotionally erratic stranger who was either up and frantic or down and comatose. She confronted Dr. Nick directly. It was a desperate, emotional confrontation, a wife's plea. She begged him to stop, to break the cycle, to hospitalize Elvis, to save his life. But Dr. Nick had a defense. It was a defense he would cling to for the rest of his life. A masterpiece of self-deception and medical rationalization. He argued that he was practicing harm reduction. He told Priscilla, and anyone else who would listen, that if he, Dr. Nick, the responsible physician, refused the king, Elvis would simply find another, less scrupulous street doctor who would provide anything he asked for, in unsterile, unknown, or even more dangerous forms. Dr. Nick positioned himself not as an enabler, but as a filter. He was, in his own mind, the only man who could control the inevitable, the only one who could manage the unmanageable, the only one who could potentially, one day, wean Elvis off the drugs. It was a masterful, tragic delusion. Priscilla saw the truth. She wasn't just fighting a doctor. She was fighting a codependent, enabling relationship that had become the single most powerful force in Elvis's life. A bond thicker than blood and stronger than marriage. She left him in 1973. She had to save herself and their daughter from the vortex. Her departure only left a larger void, one that Dr. Nick and his prescriptions were all too willing to fill. To understand the sheer scale of this operation, one must look at the numbers. The numbers are not just damning. They are logistical impossibilities that defy belief. In the final 8 months of Elvis Presley's life alone, from January 1977 to his death in August, Dr. George Nicopolis prescribed over 10,000 individual doses of narcotics, amphetamines, tranquilizers, and sedatives, 10,000 pills, vials, and shots. This volume was so massive, so astronomically high, that no single pharmacy in Tennessee could handle it without triggering immediate federal alarms. So Dr. Nick created a complex, illegal, and deeply cynical web of supply. He wrote prescriptions under the names of the Memphis Mafia members. He wrote them in the name of Elvis's own father, Vernon Presley. He wrote them in the name of his young girlfriend, Ginger Alden. And in one of the most tragic and indefensible details, he even wrote prescriptions in the name of Elvis's 9-year-old daughter, Lisa Marie. He would then use multiple pharmacies all across Memphis to fill these fraudulent scripts, which were then collected and delivered directly to Graceland to be sorted, cataloged and distributed by Dr. Nick himself. This was not negligence. This was not a series of poor judgment calls. This was a coordinated, systematic, and felonious conspiracy to supply a single human being with a chemical arsenal, all under the protected, trusted banner of a medical license. The final blow to Elvis's spirit, the event that shattered his remaining defenses, came not from a needle, but from a printing press. In July 1977, just weeks before his death, 3 of his former bodyguards and closest friends, Red West, Sonny West, and Dave Hebler, published a tell-all book titled Elvis, What Happened? It was a public crucifixion. The book exposed everything. The drug addiction in excruciating detail, the bizarre rages, the paranoia, the unhealthy reliance on his inner circle, and it named Dr. Nick as the chief enabler. Elvis was shattered. He felt betrayed by men he considered brothers, men who had stood with him for decades. He retreated entirely, hiding in the cold, dark, over-air-conditioned sanctuary of his bedroom in Graceland, vowing to stop the book, vowing to get better, but only sinking deeper into his depression. He was scheduled to begin a new tour on August 17th. On August 15th, he visited his dentist for a temporary crown and was given a prescription for codeine, a drug to which he had a known and well-documented allergy. That night back at Graceland, he was in agony from his tooth, anxious about the tour and spiraling from the shame of the book. He summoned Dr. Nick. The doctor visited the mansion, administered his usual cocktail of pills, and provided a powerful selection of sleeping aids to counteract the codeine he shouldn't have been given. In the early hours of August 16th, Elvis, still unable to sleep, still in pain, called his aides for more. His final fatal dose was delivered, and he retreated to his bathroom to read and to die. The chaos that erupted at Graceland on the afternoon of August 16th was immediate and total. When Elvis was found by Ginger Alden, rigor mortis had already begun to set in. He had been dead for hours. Panic ensued. The machine to protect his image, The same machine that Dr. Nick was a crucial cog in sprang into action. An ambulance was called, but it was a formality. At Baptist Memorial Hospital, the scene was one of grim theater, and in a shocking, ethically baffling move, Dr. Nick himself arrived, not as a grieving friend, but as a man in control. He inserted himself directly into the autopsy process, speaking with the medical examiners, offering his medical history of the patient. This was the fox, not just in the henhouse, but now performing the farmer's own investigation. The medical examiner, Dr. Jerry Francisco, facing the world's press and the immense pressure from the Presley family, announced the cause as cardiac arrhythmia. It was vague, clean, and most importantly, it mentioned no drugs. It was the story the family wanted, the story the world needed. But the truth had a price. Elvis's father, Vernon Presley, grieving and desperate to protect his son's legacy from the stain of a drug addict label, made a fateful decision. He had the full, detailed autopsy report sealed from the public for 50 years. It was a desperate act of love, perhaps, but it was also an act of profound obfuscation. It ensured that the full medical truth would be buried with his son. But he couldn't stop the leaks. The toxicology report, a separate document, could not be contained. It was leaked, and its contents were horrifying. It found 14 different drugs in Elvis's system, 10 of them in significant toxic quantities. The list was a pharmacy of despair: codeine, morphine, Valium, Quaaludes, Demerol, Placidil, ethchlorvinol. The official story was heart failure. The leaked toxicology report was a confession, a chemical fingerprint that pointed back to one single source. In 1980, the public pressure and the overwhelming evidence finally led to Dr. George Nicopolis being indicted by a grand jury. He was charged not with murder, but with gross medical malpractice and the overprescription of controlled substances to Elvis and several other patients. The trial was a media circus. The prosecution laid out the damning evidence: the 10,000 pills, the fraudulent prescriptions in the names of children, the sheer impossibility of this being medical practice. Dr. Nick's defense was precisely what he had told Priscilla years earlier. He was trying to save Elvis from himself. He claimed he was practicing harm reduction, that he was trying to wean Elvis off, that he had substituted thousands of placebos. He was, in his own telling, a victim of Elvis's manipulations, a friend trying to manage an unmanageable situation. The jury, perhaps still blinded by the king's light, perhaps just confused by the complex medical testimony, acquitted him. He walked free. He kept his medical license. For a time. The acquittal was a legal victory, but it was a moral catastrophe. The Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners, unbound by the beyond a reasonable doubt standard of a criminal court, launched its own investigation. They saw what the jury could not or would not: a pattern of grotesque, unethical, and dangerous behavior. In 1995, they permanently revoked Dr. Nick's license, citing his unethical and dangerous treatment of Elvis and numerous other patients. He was at last officially and permanently no longer a doctor. He maintained his innocence until his own death in 2016, clinging to the story that he was a friend, not a betrayer. But the 10,000 prescriptions, the leaked toxicology report, and the sealed autopsy tell a different story. It is a story of loyalty that became enabling, of trust that became betrayal. The final hidden chapter remains unread, locked in a Memphis vault waiting for the year 2027, when the seal will finally break and the king's last tragic secret will, at last, be told.